Welcome to Volume 3 of the Woodsmaster series, where we teach you to be the Woodsmaster. We're in the High Sierra at about 8,000 feet. And while we're up here, we're going to be talking about wilderness support packages, sometimes known as survival kits. Now, the survival kits that I'm going to be showing you are the kind of kits that work in the environment we're in. You may see as we go through these items that I'm going to recommend that some of the items that you would choose are missing. And yet I've got some things in there that you would not normally take with you. That's quite all right. Survival kits are very personal. As you work with them, you find the things that you think you need in your kit. No problem. Now, as we work through this, I want to remind you too that our goal is to provide you with the materials you need to satisfy your survival priorities. And our priorities are based on a rule that we've learned in Volume 2. It's called the Rule of Threes, and it goes something like this. You have about 3 minutes of survival without air, 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. And that's it. These kits are designed to help you to satisfy your needs in that order: shelter, water, and food. And you'll see the elements in there that'll help you to get what you need. For convenience, we've arranged these elements into 2 survival kits. We call the mini kit and the maxi kit. Now, the mini kit is a tiny little thing that you can carry with you all the time. We've learned through experience that if you make a survival kit too complete, people are just going to leave it back at camp because it's inconvenient to carry. Well, the mini kit is very convenient. You won't even know it's there, but it does a host of things. The other kit is called the maxi kit. The maxi kit contains more stuff in it. It has things like a tube tent, it's got shelter goods, it's got things to make traps, and a lot of other stuff as well. You're going to see all of that in just a little bit. But before we get started with the mini kit and the maxi kit, I want to show you how to carry a kit, and I want to show you some of the other kinds of kits that are sold on the market, give you some sense of it. So in order to do that, we've got to take a little trip over to an area where I stash these things, and we'll get started. Well, here we are, the big survival kit. I always hope it's all right when I come up here. Oh. Yeah. I told you it was a mini kit. It's a little something to carry around with you in case of an emergency. You should always have a metal suitcase with you. Let me just show you what we're going to work with here. So we're going to go through some of these things and see what we could do with it. So what I'm going to do is carry it all back to my camp, and we'll go to work on how you make an effective survival kit and how you use the parts. So let's get started. Oh, yeah, I love this one. Before we get started in this, I'd like to point something out. This little pocket on the outside of my knife sheath contains the mini kit. That's all there is to it. Down here, this purse thing contains the maxi kit. That's got the shelter stuff in it and a bunch of other items that you're going to see shortly. And you'll also notice I've got my tin can picked up in an earlier version of the Woodsmaster. I want to show you something special you could do with this tin can. I noticed when I first got into camp that there were a lot of bees, like food bees, flying around, and I find them kind of irritating. So there's a special little trick I want to show you to get them out of your camp. What you can see here is I've got a piece of something that was attractive to the bees. They were eating on it, and you can see that they're still munching on it. What I did is just suspended it from a piece of wire over a tin can filled with water. Now these things are going to eat for a while. When they get full, something interesting is going to happen. Let me show you. Well, you can see what happened. They started to munch, and as they did, they got full, and they went ahead and fell right down into the water here and drowned. if I just leave this thing alone like this, that can will fill up with bees. And later on, after it's full, I can take those bees out, boil them up, and make something nice to eat. So not only is it saving me trouble in camp, it's also providing me with a nice meal. I keep a little wild bird seed in this kit here, and I want to show you something that you can use wild bird seed and this tin can for. What you do is you dig a hole the same depth as the height of the can. So the height of the can will be even with the ground and with the dog's foot. Then you just fill that in with the dirt you dug from it, like so. Kind of a strange way to have a bird dinner, but works pretty good. There we go. Okay, now that it's level with the top of the can, I'll sprinkle a little bird seed around the outside, like so, and more down inside the hole. This way, when the birds come along and they start eating here, they'll see the seed down inside the hole. They'll jump in and eat it. Once they start to eat it and they want to get out, they can't fly because the can's too narrow, and they can't jump out because they can't jump quite that high. I've actually caught 2 birds in this a number of times. So this is a really good trick to use with a coffee can. When I was in the military, I discovered that the Army had, well, special ideas about survival kits. This is the survival kit they issued to us for use in the jungles. Let me show you what went into this thing, or at least a little bit about it. This is the same kit, and I've just opened it up a little bit. They thought that a head net and mittens for mosquitoes would be pretty important. Well, it really is. When you've got mosquitoes the size that grow in the jungles, these are pretty nice. And it does keep them away from your face. In addition to that, people won't recognize you. The kit itself is designed around a sticky display like this. Each of the sides of this box have a sticky material on it, and that way they can attach things. Like this is an antifungal cream, there's antibiotics, there are pieces of tape, bouillon cubes, a saw for cutting wood, a pencil, some paper in there to write your last will and testament, chapstick, band-aids, salt tablets, and miscellaneous other little things would all fit in this case. So it was a kind of a convenient case, but it had a lot of stuff in there that I didn't think was particularly important. For instance, there was this whistle. I don't know. Something about using that whistle in the middle of the jungle didn't seem like a good idea. Let me show you another kind of kit that they came up with. And this was a good kit. This was called the Parachute Pack Survival Kit. And all of our parachutes had these things attached to them. All we needed was a parachute, and this little guy here, we could do just about anything we needed. It had some matches for starting a fire, a band-aid in case you get a bullet through the chest, a water container, fish hooks, fire starting materials, a pocket knife, and iodine tablets for purifying water. Well, this is what gave me the idea for the mini kit and helped me to cut back on the size of the survival kits that I recommend today. But let's take a look at some of the items that might go into a survival kit and how to carry them. One of the ways to control what goes into your survival kit is to control the size of the container that holds it. And one of the ways that's been very popular for controlling the size of your survival kit is a so-called hollow-handled knife. Now I have one of them here, and this is a very inexpensive hollow-handled knife. We brought it up here and chopped with it a couple of times, and you can see that the guard here is already loose on it. We've had these knives just disintegrate up on the mountains. Here's another version of the same knife, a little bit more substantial. The blade is a good strong blade. It's got some kind of a cutting thing on the back here. I assume that's a saw. We discovered it doesn't actually saw. It also has a compass on the top of the handle. If you were to drop this knife and it landed on the handle, which it will, it'll break that compass. And that, of course, renders the compass useless. Not a good idea. Here's another one. even more of a real survival knife. So this one's even called the Explorer. See, it's got some kind of a saw blade back here. But again, if you were to try to saw wood, you'd discover pretty quickly that, oh, it'll make a fine gash for a little ways and then it just stops sawing. You may also be able to notice that right in here, it's been welded. That's because the handle separated from the blade. And that's one of the characteristics of the hollow handle blade, or hollow handle knife, is that the blade can easily separate from the handle, especially when you're chopping. You see, there's not much to hold that blade in that handle. In a conventional knife, the tang, which is the part that attaches to the handle, goes all the way to the back of the handle, and it gives you good strength. These lose that strength because there's just one little surface in there holding it, and your kit is stored right in that area. Here's another one. This is kind of an interesting little knife. Comes from Spain. It's got a real saw on the back here. This one will actually saw. The blade is welded into the handle, and it's also pinned, which means that it's a good strong connection. There's no compass on the back of the cap that goes on here, but there is a compass inside the handle itself. But what makes it more interesting is that this one contains much of its survival stuff in the case itself, including a slingshot that springs up right out of the case. Sharpening stone on the back, and inside here, inside of the case, is a little chamber that contains more survival stuff, including the rubber for the slingshot. An interesting concept. The problem is this. The blade is loose in the sheath, and it's easy to lose your knife. Here's one of the more expensive ones. This one is called the Buckmaster, and it's a piece of steel. It's got one heck of a saw on it. I don't know what you saw with it. Probably a tank. The knife itself weighs just about 2 pounds. You add to that the weight of the case, you might as well just carry a backpack. When you put this one on your belt, it hangs out away from your body, something like this. So it's a really awkward knife to carry. I have one because it's kind of interesting to look at. Beyond that, I wouldn't use it. What I'm telling you is this. My recommendation is a hollow-handled knife is not a good idea. What could happen is you could lose your knife, and when you lose the knife, you also lose your survival kit. It's a much better idea to put that survival kit in a case on the sheath, like this little case right down here. This sheath is most likely going to be staying attached to your belt, and so even if you lose your knife, you're still going to have your survival kit and the sheath. So watch out for these things here. They can be weak, and you can lose a lot of good stuff. One last little item, and that's this thing here. This is called the Survival Rescue Tool, and it's quite a gadget, actually. If you put your hand in it like so, you can use it for cutting, as with a regular knife. It's got a little rope saw on the back here. This section in this area here is like a can opener, only this can opener is designed to open automobiles. You can literally drive this down into the hood of an automobile and peel it open. It's got a wire stripper and wire cutter, a glass cutter, and you can take this thing if you'd like to, and with the cord attached to it, hook it to a couple pieces of wood and turn it into an axe. If you want to carry some real steel with you, one of these things is a handy idea. Unfortunately, the survival rescue tool is also illegal in some areas. So watch out. Check out your local laws before you try to pick one of these up. Well, now that I've told you a little bit about that, let's take a look at what goes into these survival kits. Well, looks like my dog Kuma wants to know what's in my maxi kit. So let me show you. It's really pretty simple. This is a tube tent. You're going to see this again many times. This little bag contains parachute cord. Anywhere between 30 and 50 feet of parachute cord. And I'm going to help you to understand just exactly what that parachute cord is in just a few moments. 2 to 4 large, heavy-duty trash bags. These are dark, as you can see. 2 to 4 clear plastic trash bags. These aren't quite as large and not nearly as heavy, but they got some unique uses that I want to show you. Surgical tubing, anywhere between 2 and 4 feet of this stuff. This is springy. I'll show you how you can make traps and ways to catch animals and all kinds of stuff for that. And then we've got a candle. This is a Pink Lady candle. So I usually carry anywhere from 1 of these to 3 or 4 depending on how long I expect to be out. Water purification. This little bottle contains iodine crystals, and that's how I purify my water. I could also carry water purification tablets if I'd like to, or even a water pump, but this is the most convenient thing I've been able to find. I'll be showing you how to make this as well. Those are the basic items that you'll find in the maxi kit. Tube tent, parachute cord, candle, water purification, surgical tubing, trash bags. That's it. Now there's a few extra items that I like to toss in as well. These are things I call convenience items. Let me show you what I toss in for convenience. This little package here is tea, coffee, a little bit of toilet paper. That's real convenient to have along. Some salt and pepper, and various spices. Tabasco sauce is always good. Can make almost anything taste reasonable, like those bees over there. Bees and Tabasco sauce. Can't wait. This is the little mini kit I was telling you about. You can see this will fit in my pocket, and it's in a heavy-duty clear plastic case, so I can look in there and see exactly what I've got and reach in and take it out and use it whenever I'd like. I also carry a space blanket. This is the lightweight kind, weighs about 3 ounces. It's a aluminized mylar. Got some interesting uses for that as well. A whistle, in case there's an emergency. I can call people or I can call for help. This thing will blow long after my vocal cords give out. And this little device here, called a carabiner. Got some great uses. It's an accessory, not essential, but fun to have along. I also carry this little guy here. It's got a compass in it, a magnifying glass, a couple of batteries, and a tiny flashlight. I usually find that on a survival trip, when it gets dark, I go to bed. When it gets light, I get up. So I don't use these very much, but it's nice to have one around just in case I need it in the night. And I also carry tinder. I usually carry the tinder in these little film cans. This one here is filled with cotton, and I have another one filled with steel wool. If you've got volume 1, you know what that's good for. And by golly, that's it. Let's put this stuff to work and see what we can do. A tube tent is nothing more than a giant plastic bag with both ends cut off. And you can get them in all kinds of different colors and sizes and thicknesses. This little yellow one here is a tiny one that you can carry around in your back pocket if you'd like. It's quite thin and not very durable, but it is easy to see. That's not the one I'm going to use. I prefer the clear plastic heavy 4mm tube tents. Whenever I can find these, I buy them. These are good for a lot of different things besides a shelter, but let me show you how you set up a tube tent so you're not in the dark anymore. I've already tied this cord to the tree over there. So what I'll do is I'll just pass it through the tube tent, like so. When it comes out the other end, tie it to a tree, as you can see here. Now what I've done is simply suspended the tube tent from the string. And in just a moment here, I'll show you how it goes together. Got to tie it off first. Fall down on me. Crushed beneath an unbelievable tube tent. And there it is there. That's about how fast you can set up a shelter in an emergency. All you do is crawl inside and you've got shelter. Now what you're going to want to do when you make this thing is close off one end a little bit. never close off both ends. If you do that, what you're going to be doing is creating a giant plastic bag, and you'll suffocate in it, which is a violation of your first rule in the rule of threes. You've always got to be able to breathe. So we'll seal this off just a little bit. We can tie it off or do whatever we'd like. And we'll tie it to this end, and then I'll show you some more tricks with the tube tent. Now that we've got the tube tent strung, you'll notice that it slides back and forth pretty easily. And if the wind starts to blow, it'll slide all the way down into a big clump and not give you any shelter. So here's a cute little trick that'll help to hook that thing in place. And all it requires is a little loop of cord, about like you see here, and a small smooth stone. Let me show you how this is done. Just lay that cord over the top of the line that holds up your tube tent, just like this. Bring it through, over the top again, bring it through. You can see it's made a little loop. Now draw that thing tight. And what will happen is it'll make a funny little knot that's called a prusik knot. You can see what it looks like right here. That knot will grip the line. So if I pull it tight, like so, and then jerk on that, this is going to be in place. It's going to hold it right there. But if I grab the knot itself, I can slide it right up the string pretty easily. And you'll find this is useful in a lot of different circumstances. Now about that rock. What we'll do is this. We'll take the tube tent. You see that wind's blowing a little bit. Take that tube tent and push the rock right up into the tube tent like so. And make like a little pocket. You can see it's stuck right in there. Now we'll draw that line over, and we'll make another prusik knot, just the same. Only this time I'll loop it like so. You can see, got a little loop. You can just tie it on if you'd like to. Tie it around under the rock like you see, and you can see it's good and secure. As long as that rock's in there, this isn't going to slide out. Slide the prusik knot up, jerk it tight, and that holds the that holds the tube tent tight right on the parachute cord. So now we're not going to have this thing sliding back and forth on the line. There we go. One of the keys to survival with the tube tent is never seal both ends of the tent. Remember, you could suffocate in that. And if it's snowing out, be sure that the snow doesn't compress the ends and seal you in that way as well. But now that I'm in here, I'm really well protected from the wind, which is one of the heat loss mechanisms. So I'm protected from heat loss through the wind blowing by me. But it's still not quite right. You can probably see that the wall of this thing is kind of coming in towards me, which means that there's not a lot of space in here, and this thing will be flapping around a lot. So let me show you another little trick to turn this tube tent into a really comfortable home, something like a Quonset hut. So you want to add a few square feet to your tube tent. Here's the way to do that. A couple of pieces of your parachute cord and some flexible pieces of willow or some other plant. Put them together about like you see here, and you don't have to be creative about this. It just requires a simple little knot of some kind. It's not going to be under much pressure, so you don't have to be real sophisticated. And you tie the tops together like you see here. And turn it over. And take another piece of flexible willow and choose either one of these, doesn't make much difference. And another small piece of cord. Let me just flip this one over. and lash those together as well. And again, it doesn't have to be very tight. It's just there to hold it in place for a little while. And you'll see what I mean by that. Now I've got 3 cords tied together, and they make kind of like an N. Let me show you how you put this to work. Now that I've got these pieces tied together, and I'm inside the tube tent, what I'll do is I'll just spread them out, as you see here. You got to be careful you don't put a hole in your tube tent with this. And if it looks like it's going to cut a hole, just go ahead and bend the tube tent a little bit, or bend the string a little bit. There you go. After I learn how to talk, it'll work fine. And you can see that opens up the tube tent in the area that I'm going to be staying in, kind of like a little rib. So now I've got a Quonset hut tube tent with a lot more space. Walls are pretty straight. This thing is nice and stable. It's going to be held out, and it's a good, comfortable area to hang out in. I've even got a place, if I'd like to, I could hang things like my candle lantern from the string or these stays I've got above my head. That's a good start on your shelter. This is the space emergency blanket, which I showed you earlier, and the other hand is holding the space blanket. Now there's a difference. You can probably tell the difference in just size alone. But they serve different purposes. They're both very good for what they do. Let me show you this big space blanket first. This thing weighs about 11 ounces. It's also quite a bit bulkier. It's got an aluminized coating on the inside, on one side, and a dark coating on the other. It's waterproof, windproof, and it'll reflect heat, either back at you to keep you warm or away from you to keep you cool. It's a good sturdy thing. Got grommets in the corner, and you could use it as an emergency shelter or tent or whatever else you'd like to do with it. It's a nice thing to have with you. This little blanket here, the Space Rescue Blanket, is convenient because of its size. And like its big brother, it will reflect heat back at you. But you can see that it's really very thin. It's a very thin aluminized mylar. And it will stop the wind, it will stop the rain, and it will reflect heat back at you or away from you. But it has some other purposes or uses as well. I'll just show you a couple of them. One of them, you tear off a little section of it, and you can see it tears pretty easily, which is one of the problems with this stuff, is as emergency sunglasses. You can actually see through this stuff. So if you're caught out in a blizzard and then it clears up, gets awfully bright, or even in the desert, you can put this in front of your eyes and protect your eyes from sun or snow blindness. That's nice. If it's very, very hot out, you could turn this stuff into a hat, protect your head, and not cook. Cooked brains are bad. Now if you're going to sleep in this thing, and it's big, if you can get it unwrapped, it's a good sized piece of material. If you want to sleep in it, you'll find pretty quickly that you could tear it by just rolling around in it. So that's not good. The way to use this stuff is to put this on under one layer of clothing. That way your clothing protects it from abrasion and so forth, but you're still able to take advantage of its protective qualities in stopping the wind and reflecting your body heat back at you. But it is a handy thing to have with you. This one, because of its size, I've used this skiing many times. We've seen injured people. We just stop and wrap them up in this, and it protects them well. And the other one, because it's durable and it works really well. But both of these are good products, and you might consider them for your kit. The trash bag is the only part of the maxi kit I recommend that you carry with you at all times. This thing is a lifesaver. I always keep at least one trash bag in my back pocket. That and my mini kit, and I know I'm okay. Now this trash bag is sort of special, and it's the kind that I recommend that you purchase. You see, this is what's called a construction trash bag. It's made out of a 4mm plastic. It's about 4 feet long and a good deal wider than a conventional trash bag. You can see it darn near covers my body. In fact, you can take 2 of these things and slice the end off of one, team them up, and make yourself a little tube tent. Now, the ordinary way to use one of these for shelter or for protection from the elements is one you may already have seen in Volume 2 of the Woodsmaster series, but I'll show you again just so you remember. It's that important. Well, There we go. That's it. I'm protected now. Protected from wind and rain and everything but suffocation. So what I need to do is make sure that when I put it on, I leave a little room for my head. Hello. And there it is there. So you can see, well, I guess I can see that I've got some shelter here. There it is. And that's it. This is the difference between life and death. This piece of plastic right here. Now, because it's so strong, it'll take a lot of abuse. I can roll around in it, I can sleep in it, I carry pine needles in it, and do a whole bunch of other stuff with it as well. That's one type of trash bag. Let me show you another one. I mentioned earlier the clear plastic trash bag. Let me see if I can get out of this one first. Whew. Getting hot in there. Clear plastic trash bag isn't actually clear. It's kind of a milky color. But the reason I recommend these are because you can use them for so many other kinds of things. As an example, with this clear plastic, you can make an above-ground solar still. What's a solar still, you ask? Well, a solar still is a technique for extracting water from the ground or from vegetation, water that you can drink. And as you know, water is one of our priorities. The sun can penetrate through this plastic, heat up something inside, drive the moisture out of it, and then because it's plastic, that moisture will cling to the plastic on the inside and dribble down into a little pool where you can retrieve it. But actually instructing you on how these things are constructed and all the little nuances, that'll be for a later edition of the Woods Master. No matter where you go in the mountains these days, you're going to need to drink water. And the water you need to drink may be polluted, either by man or by animal. So you need to clean that water. And if you drink the dirty water, you can get mighty sick. Well, you can boil the water. That'll kill most everything. But sometimes you don't have a chance to boil it, or other circumstances would stop you. So I recommend that you carry with you some sort of a chemical purification technique. And the one I've settled on requires that you do a little scouting around to get all the parts and pieces together. But let me show you how it's made. It starts out with a 1-ounce glass bottle. Mark that, glass bottle. You can tape it or wrap something around it as I've done here to keep it from breaking. And the next thing is a little harder to find. You need to find 8 grams of resublimated USP iodine crystals. Okay, that's a mouthful. Resublimated USP iodine crystals. Now, only 8 grams. What you're going to do with this is you're going to pour those crystals into the bottle, as you see here. Now, while this is going in there, I should point out that iodine is toxic. It can kill you. In fact, if you were to eat a few ounces of this stuff, it probably would. If you've got any carbohydrates in your belly, it probably won't. And then again, you may be sensitive, so it probably will. There's no way to tell. It's just that when you use it the way I'm going to show you, it is safe. Well, now what I've got here is 8 grams of iodine in a 1-ounce bottle. And the way I purify water is like this. I take the water I want to purify and pour a little bit into the bottle, like so. That's about 1 ounce of water. Put the cap back on and shake it up. After I've agitated this for a little while, and I can do this for 20 seconds or 30 seconds or whatever, I'll let it sit for maybe a minute or so. You can let it sit for 20 minutes or 5 hours. It wouldn't make much difference. Because once you've got an iodine solution in here, you can't get any more iodine into it. So right about now, it's almost ready. Take the cap off. Take 1 quart of water that you want to purify and pour only the liquid from the bottle into that 1 quart of water. And let that sit for about 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, it's good pure water. Well, at least it's dead water. What you've got left now is a 1 ounce glass bottle with 8 grams of resublimated USP iodine in it. You see, you can use it again and again and again. In fact, this little bottle here will purify thousands of gallons of water. And this way I don't have to worry about ever running out of the chemicals I need to treat my water. Iodine tablets are another alternative, but after a little while they'll go bad once you open the bottle. So you might want to consider this technique here. You know, the so-called 1 pound coffee can is probably one of the most important things you could toss in that maxi kit of yours. I call it so-called because they used to hold a pound of coffee. Now I guess they hold about 14 ounces. Whatever, they still hold almost a quart of water. And that's what's important. You can kind of measure water by using these little gradations on the side of the can itself. These things are useful for cooking. They're useful for getting water out of ice cold streams if you don't want to get your hands wet. They're useful for catching small game and digging holes. So this is probably one of the most useful of the multi-purpose pieces in that maxi kit of yours. Get one of these. Your maxi kit contains 30 to 50 feet of parachute cord. Now, parachute cord is a special kind of cord. It's not just something called paracord. It has a certain characteristic to it that you're going to be looking for. You've got to be certain that you get the right stuff. Now let me show you what I'm talking about here. Real parachute cord, like you see right here, contains a number of different large strands or filaments. You can see how they're all broken apart. Each one of those individual filaments then has a number of smaller threads making it up. You can see it right there. So what you're looking for is a parachute cord that has large inner strands, each of which has smaller thread-like strands. Now, the reason for that you're going to see in just a little while, because we're going to be using those thread-like strands to do some sewing. And the larger strands will be used for other things. You can also remove the sheath from the outside of the parachute cord, so you'll have all of that nice thread and material to work from. You've still got the sheath to work with as well. Now that's one of the characteristics you're going to be searching for with parachute cord. But there's something else that's really important to know. Parachute cord is very, very strong. In fact, it's tested at about 550 pounds. That means it should be able to support your weight. Since it can support your weight, there are a few emergency kinds of things that you could do if you combine the parachute cord with another special item called the carabiner. Now this is a carabiner. It's a device that's used by mountain climbers and rock climbers to connect to ropes and to other pieces of equipment. They're relatively inexpensive. This particular one is called a D. You can see it looks like a D locker. It's a locking D. Now let me show you why I carry one of these and some of the uses for it. When I team this with the parachute cord, I can do something like this. I've attached this cord to this branch up here. Now before we start with what I'm going to show you, I want to make certain that you understand. What I'm going to show you is only an emergency technique. This is not for recreation. Do not do this unless it's an emergency. Even then, it's very, very dangerous, but it could save your life. Now let me show you. We're going to be using the carabiner in conjunction with the cord. I'll open up the part that slides open. It's called the gate. And I'll wrap the cord around the carabiner several times, like so. Now I'll just slide it back up the rope like that. Now you'll notice if I keep tension below the carabiner, I can't slide it. But if I loosen up that tension, it'll slide easily. What this means is this: if you need to get down something very steep or lower something, and you use this technique with your parachute cord, you can hold on to the carabiner like that and let it take up the pressure of the thin cord, which would cut your hand if you tried to slide down it, and control your descent by just letting the cord loose at the bottom. That's all there is to it. So watch out for this. Again, don't do this unless it's an emergency. Now there's a whole lot more you can do with the parachute cord, so let's take a look at a few of those tricks. Now surgical tubing is kind of a strange part of the maxi kit, and it's not altogether essential. But it has some special uses I think you're going to find interesting. Now what is surgical tubing? Well, surgical tubing is something like a latex rubber. And it's very, very stretchy like this and quite strong. You've probably seen it in exercise machines before. Where do you get it? Well, you can buy it at pharmacies, surgical supply houses, and some dive shops carry it for use in spears. But when you buy it, you're looking for something about a ½ inch in diameter, and you don't want a real thick wall on the tubing itself. Some of the dive shop stuff have these really thick walls with a tiny little hole in the middle. And that hole is important to you because you'll be using it as a soda straw and other things as well. But for the moment, let me show you one way you can use it. Now you can see I've tied a knot right in the end of this piece of surgical tubing. And I have my parachute cord right here. So what I'm going to do is make a little loop like so. Push the surgical tubing right through the little loop. And you can see now it's attached to the parachute cord, which is attached to this branch of a tree. And you can see it's stretchy. Well, that might suggest that this could be used as the motive power in a twitch-up snare. Now traditionally the twitch-up snare, which is a kind of a snare that snaps up, we use a live branch from a tree or some small bush. And you'll need to trim all of the branches off of it. By using a piece of surgical tubing, you don't need to trim anything, and it gives you lots and lots of snap and lots of power. So let's go ahead and make ourselves a little trap out of the surgical tubing, and then I'll show you some more things that you can make with surgical tubing, parachute cord, and a carabiner. I'm going to show you a little 3-stick trap, little twitch-up snare. Now I want you to know that there are literally thousands of ways to make different kinds of traps, twitch up and crushing and all the other kinds of traps you could make. And the intention of this volume of the Woodsmaster isn't to teach you how to make those. We're going to do that in a later volume. But for the moment I thought it'd be interesting for you to see how you can use one of these kinds of traps with the surgical tubing and parachute cord. Now what I've chosen is a 3-stick trap. And basically what it is a piece of wood here. You can see it's about a foot and a half long with a point on one end and a little notch carved out of the tip at the other end. This is going to be driven into the ground. Now there's another piece, that's this thing here. This also has a notch on it, and I'm going to be attaching the parachute cord right to the end of that. And these two hook together like so. So I'll stretch the surgical tubing down, it'll hook on like so. Now there's going to be lots of tension trying to make this take off that way. Well, how's the animal going to make it release? Well, that's the reason we have a third piece, and this is the trigger. The trigger fits in between the vertical piece and the part that's connected to the power. And what will happen is when the animal touches this piece out here, the trigger, that'll pry these two pieces apart and this will jump up in the air. Well, how's he going to get caught? Well, that's the job for the snare. And the snare is made out of just a little piece of parachute cord. And it's attached to the end of the section that flies up in the air, like so. So I'm going to go ahead and put this together and I'll show you just exactly how this thing works. Well, here you have it. Basically what I've done is I've taken that long stick, the longer of the 3 sticks, and driven it into the ground at an angle. The reason for that is there's going to be tension pulling straight up on it. If I drove it straight into the ground, it would pull straight out. But by putting it in at an angle, then it will bend back around like so, and that makes it harder for this stick to come out of the ground. I then dragged the trigger stick down right in here, and it's of course attached to the surgical tubing, and placed in between it the actual trigger mechanism. That's this little stick here. Now ordinarily this piece of wood is going to be a lot closer to the ground, so that the animal would step on it and trigger it. You can set it up in the air so they can trip it going either direction. But in any case, this is the snare loop that you see here. And I've just draped it over the top of the trigger. Now you can make these more sensitive if you want by working a little bit at the whittling on here. But let's just see if this one works. There you go. You see it caught my hand. Now I would normally put a lot more pressure on this so it would lift the animal up a lot higher. But I didn't for a reason. When you set traps like this, you're exposing yourself to injury. You see, this little piece here can come up and hit you in the eye. Whenever you're working on twitch-up type snares, always be certain that all of the parts that are going to move are well away from your face or other body parts. And be sure, of course, that there's no one else standing around. But stay away from these when you're working on them. I usually like to lay down, as I'm doing here, when I'm actually setting the trap. Which means that when I hook this thing up, I just drag it down, it's away from me, and hook it on. And it's all set to go. My dad, the Lost Hood, Dell for short, came up with this little thing. You see, my dad's a heck of an outdoorsman. He's taught me a lot of neat tricks, and here's one that he likes to use with a piece of surgical tubing. You can see this is actually a slingshot rubber here, but surgical tubing would do the same thing. And what I've done is I've taken a piece of lining from the inside of that parachute cord and tied it up nice and tight. So I make a little loop out of the surgical tubing. You can see some of that cordage right here. After it's tied up nice and tight, you take your pocket knife and trim those little cords short, like so. Now what you're going to have is something that looks about like this. Well, you remember that carabiner? Dad carries one. And look what he does with it. You just slide that rubber loop over the top, like so. And the other one like this. Lock it up. And you got something that looks like a slingshot. Except it's not a slingshot. It's a bow and arrow. How do you like that? So I call this the Dell bow. Let me show you how this works. Before I demonstrate the Dell bow, I want to explain to you that ordinarily if you were going to use this technique, you'd probably make up some primitive arrows. We're going to be talking about primitive arrows, how to fashion a stone point, and how to attach feathers and so forth, in another volume of the Woodsmaster. But for the demonstration, we're going to leave those alone, and I'm just going to use a conventional target arrow like you see here. Now when you're using the Dell bow, all you need to do is to hold it in your hand like you would a slingshot, something like this. Place the arrow on top of your hand and hook the arrow in the little pocket I've got in the slingshot rubber, and then shoot it like you would a slingshot. And that's all there is to it. It'll take an arrow like this and accelerate it at a speed that's good enough for hunting small game. And since you can make this thing up in a hurry, it's kind of a nice thing to know you can do. The Pink Lady candle is something that you could find at just about any backpacking shop or sporting goods store. And these usually come packaged 2 to 4 to a package. They're very inexpensive. Now I choose these for a number of different reasons. Some of the reasons you've already seen in previous volumes of the Woodmaster. But one of the reasons I carry it is this little antler here. This is my bearing for the fire bow. If you have volume 1, you've already seen how that's used. And you also know that you need to lubricate it so that that drill will spin freely. Well, I use the Pink Lady candle to do that job. Just rub a little bit into the depression where the drill is going to go, and I can get lots of speed out of the drill when I try to make a fire, rather when I go ahead and make that fire. So it's good for lubricating things. Another use for the Pink Lady candle is, as you've already seen in volume 2, a little candle lantern, as I've got here. This is just an old aluminum can, I think. Oh, it's a Coke can. And what I've done is I've put some sand down at the bottom and cut the wings out of it, and I've got a little candle lantern. And this will help light my camp at night. And this way it keeps me from using that flashlight. This will burn for quite a while, and there's a few little tricks to it that you see in volume 2. Another way to make a reflector for your candle lantern is like this. This piece of aluminum foil comes from your mini kit, and you're going to be seeing more of this a little bit later. This piece of aluminum foil has just been fashioned into a little reflector, and this way you get more light out of that. In addition to getting more light, you also protect the flame from wind and so forth. Now, candle does more than just light your way. It's also useful for lighting wood that might be a little bit moist. Sometimes you have trouble getting a fire started. You could get your candle going, and as long as you could protect that flame, you can use the wood or the flame from your candle to dry out the wood and get that fire started. You can use it for plugging holes, and you can even use it for waterproofing some kinds of things. For instance, when you're attaching a stone point to a spear or an arrow, and you use sinew to tie it together, you'll discover that the sinew is susceptible to moisture. In other words, it'll come unwrapped once it gets wet. If you melt a little bit of wax onto that and then heat it, the wax will sink down into the sinew and keep it from coming apart. So you can use it for waterproofing. That's just a few of the uses you've got for a Pink Lady candle. Well, when I told you that the mini kit was all you needed, I wasn't altogether honest with you. You see, there's one more part to the mini kit that's not actually in this little bag, and that's your utility knife, this little guy right here. Now, I've made some choices on utility knives, and the one I finally came down to was a Swiss Army knife. This is one of their larger models, and it has 3 main tools on it, the ones that I use most often. It's got a saw blade, a regular cutting or whittling blade, and an awl. And this is for drilling into wood or bone or whatever it is that you need to drill a hole in. But this is one of the most useful tools you can imagine. If you've got this with you, you're okay. Now, Swiss Army makes a variety of tools that have these particular kinds of items on them, of blades on them, like this other model here. This is a smaller, conventional sized Swiss Army knife with a cutting blade, saw blade, and awl. But you'll notice that there's a significant difference in blade size between the two. This just makes it a little easier with the larger knife to cut more wood. You can saw a little bit farther in with each stroke. And the larger knife, of course, is burlier. Now, you need to be careful with some of these Swiss Army knives because there are a few models that are very, very large. They're thick. So when you're holding it and you're trying to do some cutting, you're going to find that it fills your whole hand. And it might, after a little bit of whittling, start to give you some blisters. So don't get the great big ones. It's better to go with a smaller knife that you can handle for a longer period of time. Either of the knives that I've shown you are pretty good. Now, when you go out to take a look at Swiss Army knives, you may run into one of these. You probably noticed that a part of it fell off. This is what's sometimes called the Swiss Army type knife. And these are really cheesy little knives. They look a lot like the Swiss Army knife. They've even got emblems on them like so. But this one here has a little screwdriver blade that used to sit right in here. And the first time I used it, the screwdriver blade popped right off. We've had a lot of students buy these things thinking they're getting a great value, and then after a day or two of using it, the blade will break or some other tool will come off, and before long the entire tool disassembles. They're just not worth getting. Buy a good tool and buy it once. And then, of course, don't lose it. Recently, there's been a whole new class of tools coming out. And these are the kind of multi-tools, pliers and wrenches and so forth, all on a little handheld guy about this size. The one I carry with me, and I do use one, is this little tool clip by SOG. It's a handy little tool. It's got a little wire cutter right in the bottom of the gripper. It's got, of course, a pair of pliers, a little pry bar, a whittling blade, and a screwdriver. But it's very, very light in weight and good and sturdy. Now, Leatherman also makes one, and this is a Leatherman type tool here. This is one of their smaller models. It has a pair of pliers, needle nose pliers, a cutting blade, a saw blade, and some other items on it. But you need to be careful with these. You'll notice that the cutting blade just drops open on this one. That's very dangerous. When you have a multi-tool like this, be sure to learn where the actual whittling blade is going to be. I've grabbed this blade actually by the blade. Pick this thing up, and didn't know that that blade was open and cut myself. So be very, very careful that if you're using a multi-tool of this type, that you know where that blade might drop. Now recently there's been a whole new class of knives, and that's this one here. This is kind of a do-it-all knife, and even though it's kind of large, it's still reasonably comfortable to hold. It's got a whittling blade, a saw blade, a little pair of pliers, and an awl. It also has some additional blades like a corkscrew and so forth. This one is made by Buck, and I think it's a really nice knife. It's good steel, lasts a long time, and it's comfortable to use. Everything works on it, and you'll find that if you buy one of these, you're not going to need to carry several different tools. You might also notice that this one has a locking blade on it, so you can lock the cutting blade open and get it out of your way by just depressing the switch on it. Well, that's it. We've got some tools. Let's see how we're going to put these to work with all the little parts in our mini kit. In the Sierra, when I need an antler, a deer antler like this one here, all I need to do is go on a slope that faces to the southwest. High up on the slope seems to be the kinds of places where these deer will knock their antlers loose when it's time to get rid of them. Well, why would I want one of these? Well, let me tell you. There's a lot of things you can make with an antler, but you need some special tools in order to do it. And we're going to show you a few of the things you can make with it and the tools you need to work the antler material. Well, I lost a button on my jacket here and I need a new one. So you remember that antler we found a little while ago? I'm just going to saw off a little disc of that and then use my awl to drill a couple holes in it and turn that into a button to repair my jacket. I could also take this and saw off this little pointy section here and make another firebow bearing like I had before. That way, if I was a four-armed guy and could run two firebows, I could get two fires started at the same time. But I won't need that. The main thing is that with this saw, I can saw even a hard material like an antler into little pieces and turn each of those pieces into something that I can use in a survival situation. That's one of the reasons I carry a saw on my knife. Okay, there we go there. I've got a little button made out of an antler. Sawed it off with the Swiss Army knife, drilled the holes with the Swiss Army knife, trimmed it up, and now I can go ahead and repair my jacket. What I'm going to use to repair it is the needle and some thread that you'll find in the mini kit. Actually, the thread's going to come from the parachute cord and the needle from the mini kit. So I'll go to work on that and I'll show you how all of these pieces work together. Well, while we're getting the parts together for the maxi kit and mini kit, the weather started to change. Cold wind started to blow down the canyon and got a little bit chilly. So we decided to move our site. We picked a spot that's more like what you saw in Volume 2. Part way up from the valley floor, out of the wind, it's on a south-facing slope, under some protection, and on top of some nice ground cover. It's a good site. We even got some juniper here that we're going to use to start a fire like you saw in Volume 1. Oh, don't worry, this isn't a repeat of Volume 1 and Volume 2. What it is we want to show you how the parts in the mini kit and the maxi kit interact with what you saw in Volume 1 and Volume 2. See, it all goes together. Now that I've got my seat ready, let's get on to the mini kit. This is the mini kit. It fits in this little small case here. You can see it's not very big. Slide right in your back pocket. Now let's take a look at what goes into this little plastic bag. What's it contain? Well, let me show you what I put in here. First thing I put in is, this is a 1/2-inch adhesive tape. You can use that for repairs, if you've got an injury. Doesn't look like much, but that's your basic first aid kit in the mini kit. It contains a balloon. This is like a water balloon. This will also be our canteen. So if we want to, we can go down and get some water at the stream, bring it back up here, and we'll have some water to drink. It has fish hooks. These are number 10 to 14 fish hooks, depends on where you are. And as you can see, I just put them on a piece of paper, lay some tape over the top so I can punch them out the back, something like a vitamin container. You'll see more of that in just a few moments. It also contains these things here, these are split shot or BB shot used for weighting the fishing line. You can get these at any fishing shop. And anywhere from 4 or 5 to maybe even 10 of the little safety pins. Again, these are for repairs, different kinds of traps, and for fishing. I'll show you how to use these things in ways that you may not have dreamed of. I keep them conveniently hooked to a little string like this so I can get at them when I need them. It contains about 2 feet of heavy-duty aluminum foil. You'll see a lot of uses for this stuff. A flavor packet. This one happens to be chicken flavor packet. A bouillon cube would work just fine. This is to make those unpalatable dinner items palatable. In other words, they may be edible, but you may not like them. This helps to make them taste just a little bit better. Snare wire. You're going to see a lot more of this in just a few moments. There are a lot of uses for this wire. It's not just for snares, it's for all kinds of neat things. This is a little fire starting tool. You've already seen this in Volume 1 and Volume 2, but this is a real fine little item. Easy to carry with you. Start a fire in any conditions. About 10 feet of 6-pound monofilament fishing line. I keep it wrapped up like that so I can get at it easily. Use it for a lot of different things, from repairs to fishing. This is a double-edged razor blade. It's got a little cover on it for safety so I don't accidentally cut the other components up, but it's sort of like an emergency knife or a scalpel if you need one. And it contains needles. These are easy-all needles. You'll see more of that in just a few moments. I keep calling the wire snare wire, but it's really a lot more than that. But what kind of wire do we choose? Well, I've got 2 choices here, and both of them are really good. One of them is called Monel stainless steel wire. This stuff is 45-pound test, and it's used for fishing. You can get it at most fishing shops. Excellent wire, very, very pliable, and since it holds 45 pounds, it's quite strong. But what will work just fine is galvanized steel wire. This you can get it at any hardware store, and I recommend something between 24 and 28 gauge. That'll give you a strength of about anywhere from 15 pounds down to maybe 5 pounds on the 28 gauge, as you see here. In any case, you don't want very thick wire, you just want something that's flexible. Before we go any farther with any of this stuff though, let me show you how you make a snare out of snare wire. Before you go ahead and start trapping animals, be sure to check the local game laws. It might not be legal in your area, but if it is, here's how you make that snare. Take a piece of snare wire about a foot or 2 long, and an old dead stick, as you see here. Let about 1 inch or so of the wire stick across the stick, as you see, and then just wrap the wire around it a couple of times. After you've done that, bring the 2 edges together in this manner, squeeze them, and rotate the stick. What that does is it helps to twist one piece of wire around the other piece of wire. Gives it a good tight connection between the 2 sections. After it's on there like that, just break the stick, like so. Then you can withdraw the stick and you're left with a nice little loop. Take the other end of the wire, push it through the loop, like so, and you have a snare. What will happen is the animal's foot or neck will get into this thing, and it'll tighten down around it, and they won't be able to get away. So it just basically holds the animal in place. And it may, as I say, either be by the foot or by the neck or even some other part of its body. But the snare is a traditional and very effective way to put some food in your pot. There's literally thousands of uses for a piece of wire. You probably already know that. As we go through the rest of the contents of the mini kit, you're going to see some more uses for the snare wire that we've included in there. But before we go on to that, I'd like to add a couple of quick comments about snares themselves. Snares are really indiscriminate killers. In fact, they don't actually kill, they restrain. What they do is they hold an animal in one place long enough for you to come and retrieve the animal, and then you kill it. At least that's the way it usually works out. They're also not particularly effective. If you want to catch something with one of these, you're going to need to set up anywhere from 4 to 8 of these things every time you find a new campsite. They're about maybe 25% effective when you set them perfectly. So don't expect to set one snare and catch an animal. There's another thing I'd like to point out about snares. Because they don't actually select the animal that they're going to be trapping, it's possible that you could set a snare for a rabbit and end up catching a mountain lion. And that's definitely something that you don't want to do. So be sure that whenever you set a snare, you set something that's going to be weak enough that an animal you don't want to have is able to break it or able to escape. So with your snares, be careful that you can't catch something too big for you to use. Now there's advantages to snares too, and we're going to be discussing all of those things in another volume of the Woodsmaster. So a little bit farther on down the line, I'm going to be showing you how to set a snare effectively and how to select the animal that the snare is going to trap. Meanwhile, let's get on with the rest of the stuff in the mini kit. Here's a neat little trick. You can see I've got my little tool clip, my little multi-purpose tool here, and this is a magnet. It's a nice strong magnet. Well, I take all of my metal items like this and I magnetize them. The way you do that is when you're at home, you just rub them on a magnet. You can get this from a speaker or, well, there's a lot of different places. You'll find magnets, kitchen magnets and so forth. But just rub it until it's magnetized. After it's magnetized, you'll find that you can then magnetize other items like a piece of snare wire. I've got a little piece of snare wire here, just about an inch long. When you want to magnetize something, just grip it and rub the end of it with whatever it is that you have that is magnetized, like the magnet or, in this case, my tool. Now, why would I want to magnetize that? Well, let me show you. Take your hat and push down the top of the hat, as you see here, to make a depression. And then with a piece of one of your trash bags, line that hat, like you see here. Now you've got a waterproof little cup here. After you've waterproofed it like so, you can add some water, like that, and you got a little lake. You now take a leaf, this is just an old oak leaf, and that little piece of magnetized wire, and lay the wire on the oak leaf, and then set the whole thing right in the water. And what will happen is, after the water stops moving, this little assembly here is going to orient itself north-south. So what you'll have then is, with that piece of magnetized wire, a nice little compass that you can carry with you anytime you want. Remember, all you need is a piece of magnetized wire or a needle, a leaf, and some still water, and you'll be able to make a compass. We'll get back to this in just a moment after the water settles down. Okay, it's pretty well centered now. Let me just show you something. Here's a real compass, and when I bring it in, it'll probably affect this one. Maybe you can see that they're pointing in roughly the same direction. At any rate, that's how you make a little magnetic compass out of a piece of wire, a little bit of water, and a leaf. In order to keep the fish hooks safe and organized, I just lay them on a piece of paper, as you see here, and then put a piece of Scotch tape right over the top. And that keeps them all together and keeps the points out of the way. When I need one, all I do is grab that fish hook and push, and it shoves the hook out through the back of the paper, like so, and I've got access to it, just like in a little vitamin packet. In order to use the fish hook with a fishing line, just grasp the hook in a way that's safe and push the line through the little loop in the back of the hook. Pull a couple of inches out like so, and then just twist the hook. Now be careful, of course you don't want to catch yourself with this little guy. Just twist it a few times like so. 3, 4, 5 times, 10 times. Doesn't make a lot of difference till you've got one piece of line wrapped around the other, as you see here. The next thing that you do is you push the free end of the line through the loop that's formed above the hook itself, like so. Whoops. Like so. After you've done that, yeah, after you've done that, just pull it tight, like so. There you go. At any rate, it tightens down right around itself. You can see it's something like that. Then you just snip that little piece off there, and you've got the hook firmly attached to the line. The split shot has a little crack, a little cut right in the middle of it, as you can see here. Just right in there. That's where the fishing line is going to go. You just set it right in there like that, and then squeeze it shut. Now you can squeeze these with your fingers. You can also, if you've got one of your little handy-dandy tools, give it a light squeeze that way. You don't want it on there too tight. You want it loose enough so that you'll be able to slide that little weight up and down on the wire, or excuse me, on the string. So that's what we got there. You'll want this about, oh, I'd say a foot or maybe 2 feet above the hook. But that weight will help to sink whatever bait you're using to try to catch fish. There we have it. A fish hook, fishing line, and a weight. Now, I've got to ask you a question. Why do we have to limit this just to fishing? Why can't we use this for other things? Well, the answer is we can. You see, a lot of times names set applications. In other words, we call this a fishing hook, so we only use it for fishing. But these little things here are just excellent for birding. You can hook this up, just as I've done here, tie the line off to some sort of an object like a stick or a rock, put some bait over the end of this, and an animal like a bird will swoop down, grab it, swallow it, and just like with the fish, it'll hook it. So you can use this on quail, dove, grouse, and other small birds like that. You may even catch some other kind of an animal like a field mouse or something, and they don't taste too bad. Earlier you saw the little safety pins that I include in the mini kit. You may have wondered why I include those. Well, the obvious answer is you can use it for tying up pieces of clothing and the like. But there's some other uses for these. Let me show you one of them. Here's one here I've already rigged together. I've just taken some of the snare wire and I've tied 3 of these together. And what we do with them is this. We turn them into something that you can call a gig. It's a 3-pointed, like a little hook. You can see here. I had it in its safety position before. Got 3 little points on it now, and they're all ready to go. And because it's got a steel wire on here, you can use this for animals that actually have teeth. So if you wanted to catch some kind of an animal like a marmot, you can put some bait around the outside of this, put it outside of their hole, and when they swallow it, this will hook on them. But because you're using wire, their teeth won't be able to cut through it, and they won't be able to get loose that way. Whenever you use something like this, you want to be absolutely certain that you restrain the animal and they don't get away, because eventually these little points will kill them. So you can't let that animal get loose. Now another thing you can use this for is you can drop this into some water, like so, put an attractive lure, maybe a little piece of aluminum foil here, and then bop it up and down like so. A fish will come by to take a look at it, and when he does, you jerk it up out of the water, and the little points will engage their body, and you can just flip them up onto the shore. It's an extremely effective way of catching small fish, and also quite illegal in most areas. But in a survival situation, it is legal and it is effective. These are the Easy All needles. They look a lot like a regular sewing machine needle, but they're quite a bit thicker. Now you'll notice I keep them taped together. This is for safety. I don't want these things coming loose and poking me while I'm walking around with them in my pocket. I say they look like a sewing machine needle, and you can see that the hole for the thread is up near the point. This one's got a little chisel point on it, and the other one has a rounder point on it. Both of them have a groove that goes down the length of the needle itself. Where do you buy these? Well, just about any hardware store will carry a Speedy Awl or an Easy Awl, and those are the needles that you use for it. Let me show you how you put these to work to sew some pretty heavy stuff. I've made a little handle for the needle. This way I won't have that kind of pointy end on the back end of the needle pushing into my hand. It gives me a little better control over it. And as you saw, I just used the awl in my Swiss Army knife. Now what I want to do is take some of the thread, the inner lines out of the parachute cord, and turn that into thread. We're going to put these all together, and then we're going to sew something together. I went ahead and threaded the line from the inside of the parachute cord right through the tip of the needle. Now what I want to do is push that through my jacket. Why do I want to do that? Well, if you remember, earlier on we made a button with a piece of antler. We used our Swiss Army saw to cut off a little disc of bone, and then we drilled some holes in it with the awl on the Swiss Army knife. So I'm just going to drop that button right over the top of the needle, as you see here, and then I'm going to withdraw the needle, and the thread goes right through it. Now what I've got is part of the thread is on one side of the fabric and the other part is on the other side of the fabric. The next thing is to push it through again, like so. Now you might want to notice that the needle has a little groove on one side, and the thread will slide down in it. The other side has no groove in it. That's important for this reason. What we're going to do now is we're going to drop the needle, or the disc of bone, right over the top of the needle. And you see, I can make a little loop on the side of the needle that has no groove. I pass the thread through that, and then remove the needle. When I do that, I've just made one stitch. To make another stitch, I just repeat the process. Push it through on the other side, withdraw it part way, and you can see I've got a little loop here on the side that has no groove. Pass the thread through that little loop. Whoops, come here. Like so. And then withdraw the needle. And I've got another of my burly little stitches. Incidentally, this cord is pretty strong, so it's probably going to last a good while. I think just for safety I'm going to make one more stitch. Withdraw it part way. Push it through the loop. Pull it out. Only this time when I pull it out, I'm going to pull it out all the way. When I withdraw the thread, I'm going to jerk the other side right through. Oops. There we go. Now we've got it all set to go. I've got a nice tight thread. I can pull it tight like this just by jerking on it. Tie these two pieces off with a couple of quick overhand knots here just to show you what I want to do. Like that. And look, it's stitched on there. It's good and solid. And that string is really, really strong, so that'll stay in place for a long time. Well, that's how you use the Easy Awl needle, a piece of willow, your saw, and thread from the inside of the parachute cord. The aluminum foil in the mini kit can be used for an infinite number of things. As an example, I've made a little cup here out of the foil that's in my mini kit. It can also be used as a candle holder or a pot for boiling things. But what you'll discover is that the mini kit has so many applications that it's literally impossible for me to explain all of them. Let me give you an example. Many of the parts can be kind of put together, teamed up as it were. This little piece of willow I found down by the creek, and what I've done is made some little eyelets out of snare wire. There's a couple of those. We've got the fishing string, which you may not be able to see, made from fishing string. And down at the very bottom we've got the hook, got a little hook, and concealing it is a lure made of aluminum foil. And presumably this will attract the fish and they'll bite at the lure, and then you can use the hook to jerk them up out of the water. But it doesn't end there. You see, the real key to using a survival kit is innovation and learning how to take things and use them for other purposes. Now what I've got here is a piece of string from the interior of the parachute cord. This is the actual finest string that you can pull out of it. And on the end you can see a little lump. Well, this little lump is kind of a dough made out of pinyon pine nut. And what I did is I made a little surprise. This little surprise is for squirrels or other small game. And you can use the same technique for fish. Let me show you the surprise. If I just pull on this like so, you can see what sticks out is that little piece of wire right there. That little piece of wire is just a chunk of a safety pin that I cut off, and it makes a gorge hook. And remember, it's just tied to the parachute cord line. When an animal swallows that little lump you saw earlier, this thing turns sidewise in their throat or stomach, and it holds them. It pokes right in there. It's an old technique. Now what if you didn't have a safety pin? That's not a problem. Instead of using a safety pin, you could use a small piece of bone, or even if you could find a piece of stick, if you could find a piece of really hard wood. The point I'm making is the key to a survival kit is innovation. Innovation and imagination. And with those things and some basic knowledge, you can turn anything you find out here into something that you can use to help your survival. Well, there's a few more things yet to go. So let's take a look at those. Well, I think it's about time to go check that bird trap and see if anything fell in. Whoa! Looks good. Oh, man. Yes, dinner. And that's a beauty, too. You know, a lot of people think that their food is raised just like this. They see them in the supermarket like this. It must be how they're born and raised. The fact of the matter is that your chickens come with feathers and guts, just like all the animals that live out here. So there's a certain responsibility to killing animals. And a rule: if you kill it, you've got to eat it. Well, we've got this. Let's go prepare it. This rock here has these little holes. You can see these. These are Indian grinding holes. The Shoshone Indians used to live up here, would come up into this spot, and they'd gather up acorns like these here, and pine nuts out of pine cones like this one. Grind them up and make a meal. And out of that meal, they'd make some bread. Now to go along with the bread, they had another interesting trick. They'd take a rock, something like this one here, and heat it up red hot inside a fire. When it was hot, they'd remove that rock and push it up inside a bird like that supermarket quail we got earlier. After that thing is sitting inside the bird for about an hour and a half, the bird will have cooked from the inside. Now remember, the feathers were still on that bird, so it had good insulation. Once it was done cooking, they simply tear the skin a few places, pull the skin back, feathers and all, and would expose the fresh, well-cooked meat, and they could eat right off the bone. That's kind of a handy thing because, golly, you didn't even have any dirty dishes when you were done. Well, we've got one more little thing we wanted to work with here, and thought we'd go up and cook up some beef bouillon soup and say goodbye to you until the next volume of The Woods Master. That little bee bucket we set up earlier worked out pretty well. Looks like we caught a couple of ounces of bees with that. Now bees are nice because they give you anywhere from 110 to maybe 150 calories to the ounce. And we've got a couple of ounces here. So there's a nice little meal right there. Let's go ahead and get it ready for dinner. There they are. It's a nice little meal there. Now, some people might find that this is not particularly appealing. The flavor may be a little different than what you're used to. That's why we do this, a little bouillon cube. Remember, there's one of those in your mini kit. You can have either a bouillon packet or a bouillon cube. And what I do is I just mix a little bit of bouillon in with it, something like this. Break them up a little bit, and then I'll boil them. When they come out, this particular bouillon cube is beef flavored. I'll have beef flavored bee soup. Ready to go. That'd be good. Well, we hope you enjoyed Volume 3 of the Woodsmasters series. And we hope you learned that the two most important parts of your survival kit are your imagination and innovation. And everything else is up to you. We also hope that you'll join us in Volume 4 of the Woodsmasters series, where we teach you about wilderness travel techniques, primitive techniques for finding direction, and how to find your way through the wilderness. We hope you enjoyed this volume of the Woodsmaster, and we hope you'll join us in the next one. In the meantime, we'll see you on the trail. Come here, come on. Go.